My family said I'd be cut out of the will, for a reason so shocking no one saw it coming. I hadn't heard from anyone in the Blake family in years, until a thick cream envelope appeared under a pile of paintbrushes. At first, I thought it was just another gallery invite or a vendor invoice I'd forgotten. But the paper, thick, luxurious, and embossed with the Blakewood crest, told a different story. My hands froze. I hadn't seen that crest since the week I left Connecticut with nothing but my mother's old coat and a sketchbook. The envelope felt heavier than it should. Not physically, emotionally. Like it had waited just long enough to strike when I wasn't looking. I tore it open with a palette knife. Inside was a formal invitation trimmed in gold. You are cordially invited to the memorial celebration of Eleanor H. Blake, to be held at Blakewood Estate. And below, in Lucille's tidy handwriting, one line. It's time, Avery. She left something for you. Come home. I stood in the center of my loft, surrounded by drying canvases and the buzz of city life leaking through the cracked window, and felt 17 again. Powerless, exiled, erased. Lucille had always been quiet but sharp. When I left, she was the only one who hadn't tried to stop me. She didn't say goodbye either. She simply placed a folded Metro map and $200 in an envelope on my bed. You're not weak, she'd whispered once. They're just louder. That night, I couldn't paint. I tried, but every stroke felt mechanical. My thoughts kept circling the question I didn't want to ask. Why now? By midnight, the envelope still sat open on the table. My hands itched for something familiar, so I reached for the old wooden sketchbox Eleanor gave me when I turned 10. It hadn't been opened in years. The hinges creaked. Inside, under dried graphite and a stick of blue Conte, I found a sealed envelope with my name, in her handwriting. I sat down hard. The letter was brief, but every word pressed into me like a fingerprint. If you're reading this, it means they didn't tell you everything. They never do. But I did what I could. The gallery is yours. The papers are hidden in the greenhouse studio. If they bury the truth, dig it up. With love, Eleanor. My pulse thundered. The gallery, her private one in Soho, the one I used to sneak into as a child to stare at the unframed paintings that never made it to public view. The space no one in the family ever mentioned again after she fell ill. I hadn't set foot in that place since the week I left. And now apparently it was mine? But no legal firm, no contact, nothing but a note hidden in a paintbox. By morning, the decision was made. Not out of hope, out of defiance. As I packed my bag, careful not to overthink it, I heard the apartment door creak open behind me. I didn't have to turn. Ethan's voice came quietly. Where are you going? I wasn't surprised my name wasn't called. What shocked me was how proud they seemed to erase it. The reading took place in the sunroom where Eleanor used to host tea and sketch peonies. Now it had been rearranged into a sterile legal proceeding. Velvet chairs in rows, a podium for Goldman. And those massive windows, always letting in more light than anyone wanted. I sat in the back row, beside an elderly cousin who hadn't recognized me, and tried not to notice the line of chairs up front reserved for immediate family. Martin, of course, took center. Legs crossed, cuffs crisp, jaw clenched in that permanent smirk of command. His son Troy lounged beside him, thumbing his phone like none of this mattered. Lucille gave me a small nod when I entered. No smile, just acknowledgement. Her way of saying, you're not alone, but you're not safe either. Goldman began reading the official will. It wasn't long. Jewelry, paintings, vacation homes, each item neatly assigned. Troy received a startup investment fund to carry on the Blake vision. Martin retained full stewardship over Blakewood Estate and assets in the interest of family preservation. I waited. Quietly, even when I knew what was coming. No mention of my name. Not once. I felt a prickle along the back of my neck, the weight of 30 pairs of eyes pretending not to look at me while still savoring the absence. To be unseen would have been mercy. But this was active. Troy snorted softly. Guess watercolors don't count as a legacy. I didn't respond. Not because I couldn't, but because if I opened my mouth, I wasn't sure what would come out. Then Martin turned toward me, entirely deliberate. "I'm glad you came, Avery," he said, projecting just enough to be heard. "It takes courage to witness your own irrelevance." The room chuckled, soft, controlled, like an inside joke among predators. I swallowed back the heat in my chest. Eleanor once told me, "When they try to reduce you, say nothing. Just become too large to contain." Goldman folded the papers. "That concludes the execution of Eleanor Blake's registered will." I remained seated. Across the room, Martin tapped his fingers against his knee like he was conducting a private symphony. Troy leaned over and muttered to him, not bothering to whisper, "She really thought she'd be in it." I stood. The air tightened. Lucille shifted in her seat but didn't stop me. "I'm not here for a handout," I said. "Eleanor and I had a relationship none of you understood. That doesn't vanish because you don't like how it ended." Martin gave me a slow, pitiful smile. "Some branches don't bear fruit. We prune them." Behind me, someone exhaled like they'd been holding their breath for sport. I left the sunroom before I could say more, before I could do something I wouldn't come back from. Outside, the autumn wind cut through the collar of my coat. I pulled out my phone and typed only 4 words. "I need you here. Tomorrow." I wasn't in the will, but I wasn't empty-handed either. That night, long after the sunroom had emptied of its polished chairs and smug glances, I found myself drawn to the far end of the Blakewood grounds, the greenhouse. No one used it anymore. Not since Eleanor stopped painting. The path was overgrown. Vines curled over the stone walkway like fingers clinging to a name no one spoke aloud. I had to push open the iron-framed glass door with both hands. It groaned like a throat remembering how to speak. Inside, the air still smelled faintly of turpentine and jasmine. I moved slowly, carefully. Moonlight filtered through dust-streaked panes, illuminating rows of empty clay pots and splintering easels. At the back wall, a trunk waited beneath a stained canvas tarp. I recognized it instantly. The same chest Eleanor kept her unfinished works in. It still had the brass lion clasp with the chipped fang. I knelt, heart drumming. The trunk creaked open. Inside, old sketchbooks, one wrapped in linen, folders of half-finished charcoals. At the bottom, under a worn red scarf, was a ceramic box the color of dried roses. My hands shook as I opened it. There, folded precisely, was a handwritten document, dated, signed, witnessed in Eleanor's unmistakable slanted cursive. It wasn't a journal. It was a will. Not the polished, notarized version they read aloud today, but one older, more personal, and mine. "I, Eleanor H. Blake, in sound mind and body, leave the Soho Gallery and its holdings to my granddaughter, Avery E. Blake. Let her create without chains. Let her name appear beside what she builds." I read the words 3 times before I could breathe again. Footsteps behind me made me spin. Lucille stood in the doorway, her coat drawn tight, hair swept up in a way that always looked accidental but never was. "I figured you'd find it," she said softly. "How long have you known?" I asked. "Long enough to know what this family does with truth." I kept quiet because I thought it would keep the peace. But peace isn't silence, is it? She stepped closer and glanced down at the will in my hands. Her voice barely broke a whisper. "She made me promise to leave it where you could find it, not to interfere. She knew they'd erase me. She knew they'd try." Lucille hesitated, but she also knew you'd come back when it mattered. I looked down at the will again, at Eleanor's elegant signature. So unlike Martin's jagged, slashing one. So deliberate. "She left this for me," I said. Lucille nodded. "Because she knew you'd know what to do with it." I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed watching shadows move across the ceiling, the document resting on my chest like a second heartbeat. Around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. Landing at noon. Don't do anything until I get there. I didn't even need to turn around to know it was him, because for the first time all weekend, the room had gone dead silent. The kind of silence you could only earn by disrupting an illusion too polished to be real. Conversations froze mid-sip. Champagne paused at lips. The air tightened. I stood near the back of the reception hall beside a marble pillar, watching heads turn one by one. Then, like a calm tide parting the crowd, he appeared. Ethan moved with the confidence of someone who belonged, not to the Blake family, but to a world where legacy wasn't inherited. It was built. A charcoal gray suit sculpted sharp around his shoulders. No logo in sight, but every thread unmistakably tailored. His dark hair was neatly styled, no trace of the late-night flight or the miles behind him. He saw me instantly. His eyes locked on mine, and something inside me steadied. Ethan crossed the ballroom without hesitation. Martin, mid-sentence near the fire-lit mantel, faltered as Ethan passed. Troy stopped laughing. Even Lucille straightened slightly. When Ethan reached me, he didn't say hello. He simply took my hand, the one that had held Eleanor's letter through the night, and kissed my cheek. "Sorry I'm late," he said, just loud enough. Traffic was terrible. The room tilted. I could feel the recalibration. Every gaze recalculating, reweighing, reassigning assumptions. Martin stepped forward, trying to recapture the spotlight. "And you are?" "Ethan Ward, Avery's husband." He offered a hand. Martin did not take it. "Husband? I wasn't aware she had one." "No one asked," I replied. Goldman adjusted his tie uncomfortably. Troy shifted his weight. Someone near the bar dropped a fork. Regina, ever the opportunist, materialized beside Martin. "And what is it that you do, Mr. Ward?" Before Ethan could answer, a murmur swept through the crowd. Charlotte Montgomery, now Charlotte Blake Montgomery, emerged from a knot of guests. Her gown shimmered under the chandeliers. She froze when she saw Ethan. "You're Ethan Ward," she said, awe softening her voice. "From Ward Capital?" Ethan offered her a smile. "That's me." Her husband James appeared, his expression morphing from boredom to sharp interest. "I followed your firm for years," he said. "Art Tech Investments. You're behind the Access Point acquisition, aren't you?" Ethan gave a small nod. "One of them, but this trip isn't business." He glanced at me, then back at Martin. "I'm here to return something Eleanor gave her granddaughter." From his inner jacket, Ethan pulled out a folder. Slim, worn. Inside, he unfolded the document with the care of someone laying down a final chess move. Goldman took it reluctantly. Silence deepened as he read. I could see the twitch in his jaw, the quick flick of his eyes to Martin, then to me. "This appears to be a handwritten will," he said, dated prior to the registered version, signed, initialed, specific, and witnessed. Martin scoffed. "That's not a valid filing. We followed protocol." Goldman's voice lowered. "If this was signed with intent and no superseding will was validly executed after, this document holds." I felt a ripple move through the crowd. Troy muttered something under his breath. Lucille, standing quietly by the piano, nodded once. Regina's lips parted, then pressed together again. Martin sneered. "You think a sketchbook and a whisper count as law?" Ethan stepped closer. His voice was soft, measured, deadly. "Let's find out." They built a kingdom of marble and mirrors and assumed no one would ever look behind them. The Blakewood Library hadn't changed in decades. Polished mahogany, stained glass, and generations of patriarchs glaring down from oil portraits. It was a room built to intimidate. But tonight, it felt like the last stronghold of a crumbling empire. Martin was already inside when Ethan and I stepped in, flanked by Troy and Goldman. Lucille followed us in silence, her presence as calm as it was unsettling. Ethan placed the document on the table. "I think we all deserve clarity," he said, voice level. "Let's talk through the timeline." Martin poured himself a drink with exaggerated leisure. I don't need a lecture from some outsider who married his way into relevance. Ethan didn't blink. You'll want to hear this. I opened the folder we brought, revealing a printed sheet with 3 columns: dates, actions, and sources. According to Eleanor's caregiver notes, she was of sound mind the entire first week of May. On May 4th, she met with Lucille, and they reviewed her intentions regarding the gallery. Lucille stepped forward. She asked me to help locate witnesses. She said the registered will didn't reflect her final decisions. Goldman narrowed his eyes. There's no mention of that discussion in the official file. Because it wasn't recorded, Lucille replied, then paused. On purpose. Troy leaned on the back of a chair. And we're supposed to believe that because... What, Aunt Lucille says so? Ethan turned to him, slow and surgical. No, Troy, because your statement yesterday contradicts the signed timestamp on this handwritten will. Troy frowned. You said Eleanor was bedridden all of May? Ethan continued. But the signature on this will is dated May 6th. Your father filed to revoke it May 3rd, 3 days before it was even written. Martin stiffened. Goldman's mouth parted, then shut again. That's either a mistake, Ethan said, or a forgery filed in anticipation of this version. You're accusing us of fraud? Troy snapped. No, I said, stepping forward, placing the photograph we'd found in the greenhouse on the table. It showed Eleanor painting, dated May 5th, smiling, brush in hand. We're showing you facts. Fraud is something your lawyers can argue. Martin walked toward the hearth, back turned. This is a family matter. No, I replied. This is a matter of theft, of legacy rewritten by ego. Goldman shifted uncomfortably. We'll need to investigate this, privately, immediately. Lucille crossed her arms. Do that. But know this, Eleanor was clear. She chose Avery. And the gallery? It was never about assets. It was about integrity. Martin didn't turn around, but I saw the tremble in the way he gripped the fireplace mantel. Ethan touched my elbow gently. Outside, beyond the stained glass, the estate stood quiet. But the silence in the room now wasn't power. It was fear. Goldman turned to Martin and said, We'll need to investigate this. Privately. Immediately. In the end, they couldn't erase me. Not because I fought harder, but because I stopped needing them to see me at all. 2 weeks after I left Blakewood, I unlocked the front doors of the gallery Eleanor once called her private rebellion. The space had been shuttered for years, its entrance forgotten between a bodega and a bookstore in Soho, like a secret meant to be found only by the worthy. The nameplate had tarnished. I replaced it with a new one, the Gallery Eleanor Forgot. Inside, we left the exposed brick as it was, the floorboards as they creaked. What we hung instead were stories, the kind she never got to finish, and the ones I had waited my entire life to begin. The opening night drew a modest crowd at first, but by 8 p.m. the space was packed. Artists, collectors, students, and a few cautiously curious journalists. I wore black and stayed mostly behind the exhibit wall, watching instead of performing. Lucille brought the earrings Eleanor once promised me as a graduation gift, still in their velvet pouch. I never gave these to you, she said, voice thick. But they were never mine to keep. Ethan remained close, his presence quiet but certain. He didn't introduce himself to anyone. He didn't need to. The centerpiece of the gallery was Eleanor's final self-portrait. Unfinished. Just one bold brushstroke across her chest. A slash of green, like moss reclaiming stone. Under it, I placed a letter. The original one. Her handwriting untouched. She never needed a trust fund or a trustee. She needed someone to listen. Toward the end of the night, a girl barely 17 approached me near the sculpture alcove. Pale skin, nervous fingers. Her name tag read, Sophie. I like the one with the red sky, she said. It looked angry, but not mean. I smiled. That was mine. Her eyes widened. You painted that? I did. She bit her lip. My dad says painting's a waste, that it won't get me anywhere. Your dad, Troy? She nodded. I used to think that too, I said. Then I stopped asking what anywhere was supposed to mean. She hesitated. I draw sometimes. Not like this, but do it anyway, I told her. Sophie opened her bag and handed me a folded sheet. This is for you. A sketch of a girl standing in front of a wall full of paintings. Her face wasn't finished yet. Just outlines, ready for someone else to decide what she looked like. I traced the pencil lines with my eyes and felt something close in me loosen. Ethan came up behind me, slid an arm around my waist, and whispered, They wrote you out of the will, but they'll spend the rest of their lives explaining why. I used to think closure was something final. A courtroom gavel, a line in a will. A declaration shouted loud enough to leave no room for questions. But in the weeks after the gallery opened, I realized closure is quieter than that. It isn't thunder. It's breath. It's silence finally becoming comfortable. The press had started to circle. A small article in Artscope called the gallery a reclamation of generational erasure. Another in The Cut focused on Eleanor's final portrait and what it meant to have a Blake woman remembered not for her wealth, but for her rebellion. They kept calling me the estranged heir who returned with fire in her brush. They weren't wrong, but the fire wasn't for revenge. It was for light. Martin never reached out directly. Not even after Goldman quietly withdrew the official version of the will, citing inconsistencies and timing conflicts that could open up scrutiny neither the Blakes nor their legal team wanted aired in public. No lawsuit. No press statement. Just silence. But silence said enough. Instead, a letter arrived. Handwritten, stiff. No apology, just a list of terms. They would not contest Eleanor's handwritten will. Blakewood estate would remain under Martin's control, uncontested by me. The Soho Gallery, its contents and financial holdings were mine, formally transferred. I didn't sign anything. Ethan did. I didn't need to add my name to a document to prove it was mine. The real letter that mattered still sat in the display case beneath Eleanor's unfinished portrait. Her signature, her words, her choice. A few days later, Troy came by the gallery. Alone. No blazer. No bravado. I almost didn't recognize him. His collar slightly wrinkled, hair unstyled. He stood at the threshold for a long time before stepping in. I'm not here to fight, he said quickly. I crossed my arms. Then what are you here for? He looked around the space, eyes landing on Sophie's sketch pinned discreetly near the rear display. She talks about you. A lot. She's talented. She is, he said, and I could hear the hesitation in his voice. She wants to study fine arts. She should. She won't get my blessing, he admitted, voice lower now, but she has my attention. It wasn't much, but maybe it was the beginning of something not awful. He lingered a moment longer, then glanced at the portrait. She looked freer when she painted, he said of Eleanor. Because no one was watching, I replied. He nodded once and left. No grand gesture, no redemption arc. Just a man standing in a place that reminded him he wasn't the center of the story anymore. That night, Ethan and I walked home in the drizzle. Our building's fire escape rattled faintly as we climbed, and I kept thinking about how different it all felt now. How small the Blakes seemed from here. How far away Blakewood had become, even if it was just a state line and a mindset apart. I keep waiting for it to feel like revenge, I told him, but it doesn't. Because it isn't, he said. It's survival, and you survived with grace. We reached our loft, the scent of oil paint and wood varnish still lingering in the air. My newest piece, a bold, abstract landscape of rolling fog and broken glass, stood half-finished in the center of the room. You going to finish that? Ethan asked, slipping his jacket off. I don't know yet, I said honestly. Maybe it doesn't need finishing. Sometimes things are meant to stay open-ended. like Eleanor's portrait, like our stories. 2 weeks later, I received another letter, not from a Blake, from a lawyer representing a private museum in Chicago. They'd seen the exhibit, read the article, studied my earlier work. They wanted to acquire Reclamation in Moss, my interpretation of Eleanor's legacy. They offered real money, enough to make the gallery solvent for 2 years without even lifting a brush. I turned it down, because some pieces aren't for sale. Instead, I wrote back and offered them 3 other paintings. One of Eleanor's hands, unfinished. One of Sophie's sketch in motion. One of the greenhouse, overgrown but still breathing. They accepted. I didn't tell Martin. Didn't need to. The last time I heard his name was in a brief email forwarded by Lucille. The subject line read, "Martin Blake retires from public trust. No farewell speech, no gala, just an ending. Fitting." Lucille visits often now. We've started digitizing Eleanor's journals together. Her notes were wild and uneven, written in the margins of gallery brochures, napkins, old receipts. She had a habit of starting ideas halfway down a page, as if life didn't have time for clean margins. "I think she knew this would happen," Lucille said one evening, her voice thick with memory. "She didn't plan for war," I replied. "She planned for awakening." In March, Sophie applied to a summer arts program in San Francisco. I helped her with the portfolio. She got in. Her father didn't stop her. I framed her sketch, the unfinished girl in front of the wall of paintings, and hung it in the hallway of the gallery near the staff break room. Sometimes I pass it when I'm alone and whisper, "They tried to bury us, but we were roots, not stones." That's the thing about being written out of someone else's legacy. You get to build your own. Even the most carefully constructed lies eventually crack beneath the weight of truth. Avery's battle wasn't won in courtrooms or wills. It was claimed in silence, in resilience, in the space she built where her voice could finally echo without permission. When injustice is met with quiet defiance and proof forged in experience, even the proudest legacies must kneel. Perhaps the greatest revenge is not in proving others wrong, but in proving yourself unshakably right. Like, share, subscribe, and comment your thoughts below. Drop a 1 if this story hit home for you.